The flight hadn't even pushed back from the gate when the first spark hit the air. A narrow cabin humming with quiet tension, polished tray tables reflecting the overhead LEDs, and in seat 1A sat a woman who looked like she wasn't supposed to shatter anyone's expectations, at least not at first glance. But the moment the lead flight attendant leaned down, her shadow cutting across the aisle, her voice dropped low enough for only a few rows to hear, yet sharp enough for the entire cabin to feel. "Ma'am, first-class service is reserved for qualified passengers. You'll need to move." A few heads turned. A couple of raised eyebrows. A pause so thin it could split. And in that thin silence, something was already beginning to crack. "Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to Ariana Cole. The flight attendant's posture hovered somewhere between impatience and entitlement, the kind that didn't need volume to sting. She glanced at Ariana's black leather jacket, the simple carry-on under her seat, the calm poise that didn't match her assumptions. Her lips curled, not into a smile, but into a verdict. "Seat 1A isn't available to unverified passengers," she added, voice tightening as if the lie made itself heavier the longer it stayed in her mouth. Ariana looked up slowly, not blinking, not shrinking, just meeting the woman's gaze with a quiet stillness that unsettled more than any raised voice could have. A businessman across the aisle pretended not to stare while clearly staring. A woman 2 rows back whispered, "She doesn't look first class," as though first class had a face and Ariana wasn't wearing it. But Ariana didn't move. She didn't fidget. She didn't even sigh. She simply rested her hands on her lap, as if anchoring the moment in place. The attendant, Emma Hart, according to her badge, leaned closer, her breath a thin line of irritation. "I'm not going to ask again. Take your things and head to the back." Her tone wasn't protocol. It was personal, and the cabin knew it. Still, Ariana's expression didn't shift. Because this wasn't the first time someone tried to shrink her based on a snapshot, clothes, skin, posture, anything but truth. Somewhere deep beneath the hum of the engines, beneath the brittle politeness of pre-departure chatter, a storm was already coiling. And Emma had no idea she had just spoken down to a pilot and the owner of the airline she worked for. Emma did not step back. If anything, she leaned in closer, as if proximity could force compliance. "Ma'am, this is the final time I am asking. Seat 1A is for verified premium passengers only. You are disrupting pre-flight procedures." Her words did not rise in volume, but they grew sharper, gaining edges meant to cut. Ariana remained still, her posture calm in a way that unsettled even the passengers who had been silently rooting for the confrontation to end quickly. She had seen this pattern before, the slow tightening of assumptions, the confident rise of someone who believed policy would back their prejudice. Brian approached now, tablet in hand, tapping rapidly as if speed would grant him authority. "There is no record of her clearance," he announced, not realizing he had spoken with the certainty of someone who had not actually checked anything. He angled the tablet away from Ariana as he scrolled. "System says unverified. It is probably a reused boarding code. It happens. Seat 1A is not for experiments." A ripple of murmurs spread across the rows. The businessman across the aisle shifted, uncomfortable now, not because of Ariana, but because he recognized the look in her eyes, the kind that did not bend even under public scrutiny. Ariana finally spoke, her voice soft but firm, a steady whisper against the rising tension. "Run my name. Properly." Emma scoffed in disbelief, letting out a dry laugh that echoed slightly in the narrow cabin. "We do not have time for fantasies. Either move, or I will escalate this." She turned to Brian. "Call security on board. We are done here." Her certainty was so complete that she did not notice Lily, the junior attendant, frozen by the galley curtain. Lily had not meant to intervene. She had promised herself to stay small, to survive her probation period without conflict. But something in Ariana's stillness stirred the memory of last month's training binder, the one she had studied. Until 2 in the morning, she had seen that name printed in bold across a policy document. Ariana Cole, Senior Pilot Evaluation Authority. And yet her voice wavered when she spoke. Emma, I think you should check again. Emma spun toward her. Excuse me. Her name, Lily said, barely audible but unmistakably resolute. I saw her name in the crew registry. I do not think she is a regular passenger. Brian rolled his eyes. Trainees should remain in the galley unless spoken to. But the seed was planted. Passengers turned, curious now, watching tension become fracture. Emma tried to reclaim control. I have seen every senior pilot in this company. They do not look like this. The words dropped into the aisle like lead. Ariana inhaled slowly, her expression unchanged, but inside, an older wound throbbed. A memory she wished had faded by now. She was 24 again, fresh out of flight school, standing at the entrance of a training aircraft. A supervisor had looked her up and down and said, "You must be lost. This level requires someone who shows promise." She had shown far more than promise. She had shown excellence. But excellence had never been the shield she hoped it would be. The flashback dissolved as Brian returned, now with a more forceful tone. Security is on the way. Please gather your belongings. Ariana did not move. Instead, she lifted her phone again, but this time her voice was steady enough to silence the first two rows. Nia, proceed to phase 1 of the audit. Passengers exchanged looks. Emma frowned. What audit? But Nia's voice came through the speaker crisp and immediate. Phase 1 activated. Cabin incident logging has begun. Ariana, say the word if you want automated escalation. Brian stepped back, suddenly unsure. What is happening? Lily's breath caught. She knew now. She finally understood why the name had felt like electricity on the page. Ariana rose from her seat, not abruptly, but with the certainty of someone stepping into a role she had held long before this moment. She looked Emma in the eye, her voice calm, her presence steady. The storm outside the windows had not changed, but the storm inside the cabin had. And Ariana was no longer merely enduring it. She was preparing to end it. For a long moment, no one moved. The engines hummed beneath the cabin floor, steady and indifferent, while the tension inside row 1 sharpened into something almost physical. Emma's jaw tightened as she folded her arms and stepped back, trying to reclaim authority by widening the distance. You cannot initiate an audit from a passenger's seat, she said, though the tremor at the edge of her voice betrayed her certainty. You are bluffing. Whatever you think you are doing, it will not work here. Ariana did not sit back down. She did not raise her voice. She simply turned her phone slightly, letting the illuminated screen catch the cabin light. A series of system notifications flashed across the display. Audit logging active. Cabin misconduct flagged. Preliminary assessment in progress. Passengers leaned forward instinctively, drawn in by the sudden shift in tone. A man in row 2 whispered to his wife, "This feels serious," and she nodded without taking her eyes off Ariana. Brian looked from the phone to Emma, uncertainty now spreading across his expression like a slow crack in glass. "Emma," he murmured, "we might need to stop for a second." "We do not stop," she hissed back. "She is nobody. Security will handle it." But when she glanced down the aisle, the security officer she expected to see storming toward them was not there. Instead, another notification blinked across Ariana's screen, and Nia's voice returned, crisp and unwavering. "Ariana, the system cross-check is complete. Your identity appears in the highest tier of internal clearance. Do you want me to move to phase 2? Emma's face lost a shade of color. "What clearance?" she demanded. "What is she talking about?" But Ariana did not answer her. Not yet. Lily stepped forward again, her posture small but her courage steadying by the second. "Emma," she said quietly, "if her clearance is real, then we need to stop. We need to verify her identity before this goes any further." "I told you to stay in the galley," Emma snapped, but her voice shook now, no longer shattering the air the way it had minutes earlier. The power she wielded had begun slipping through her fingers, and she felt it. Ariana lifted her chin slightly. "You were asked to run my name," she said, her tone even, her words carried with the calmness of someone who did not need to prove anything. "Instead, you chose to assume. And now the system is doing the job you refused to do." Brian swallowed hard. For the first time, he looked directly at Ariana instead of around her. "Who are you?" he asked, genuinely this time, with none of the earlier dismissal. Before Ariana could answer, A chime echoed from the aircraft's overhead speakers, followed by the voice of the captain. "This is Captain Reynolds. We are experiencing a system audit request from inside the cabin. Would the lead flight attendant please report what is happening in first class?" The captain's tone carried the controlled urgency of someone who understood that such an audit was rare and never accidental. Emma's breathing faltered. Passengers sat straighter now, realizing this was no ordinary disagreement. Ariana kept her eyes on Emma. "You can tell him," Ariana said quietly. "Tell him why the audit was triggered." Emma opened her mouth, but nothing came out. A few rows back, a young woman holding a tablet raised her voice just enough to be heard. "She did nothing. You were the ones pushing her." The cabin murmured in agreement. Eyes narrowed at Emma and Brian. Pressure mounted like altitude. The intercom chimed again. "Lead attendant, please respond." Emma forced herself to step toward the phone panel by the galley, but her hand hovered over it without landing. Her authority had melted into the aisle. Ariana watched her for a moment, then spoke with a steadiness that felt heavier than volume. "Nia," she said, "move to Phase 2. "Phase 2 authorized," Nia replied. "Cross-department verification underway. Alerts sent to corporate oversight." Emma's knees nearly buckled. She turned, voice cracking. "Who are you?" The question trembled in the air, frightened, desperate, no longer confident, because she finally understood that the woman she had been talking down to was not just a problem to be removed. She was a mirror revealing everything Emma had tried to hide behind procedure. Ariana took one step forward, her presence grounding the entire cabin. She did not speak her full identity yet, but her words carried the weight of someone who could end this moment with a single sentence. "Someone," she said, "you should have treated with basic dignity before you ever asked for credentials." The cabin went silent again, as if the aircraft itself was waiting for what came next. The silence inside the cabin stretched thin, as if every passenger was holding the same breath. Emma stood frozen by the intercom panel, her hand hovering but unable to touch it, the weight of the moment pressing against her in a way she had never experienced before. She had commanded cabins for years, but this was the first time the cabin seemed to command her. Brian shifted anxiously beside her, tapping the edge of his tablet in a futile rhythm meant to mask rising panic. "Emma, do something," he whispered under his breath, but she did not move. She could not. The authority she once carried so effortlessly had evaporated the second Ariana spoke with undeniable certainty. A soft sound broke the tension. It was Lily, stepping closer, her voice trembling but clear. "Emma, we have to verify her identity. That is protocol. This is not right." Her words were small, but they carried through the rows like a spark across dry air. Emma spun toward her, eyes wide. "Do not tell me protocol," she snapped, but the bite in her voice had dulled. She sounded less like someone in control and more like someone trying to convince herself that she still had it. Before she could say anything else, the aircraft speakers crackled again. "Lead attendant," Captain Reynolds said. "Corporate oversight has contacted me. There has been a high-level audit request associated with the name Ariana Cole. I need confirmation immediately." A collective gasp moved through the cabin. Several passengers exchanged looks, whispering, "Corporate oversight? And what does that mean?" as the realization began to bloom that this was far beyond a simple seating dispute. Ariana remained standing, calm, composed, her phone still glowing in her hand as new notifications streamed across the screen. "Nia," she said, "report the results." Nia's voice came through with the steady certainty of someone accustomed to high-stakes operations. "Ariana, cross-department verification complete. Your identity and clearance level have been confirmed. Corporate oversight has elevated the situation. I am ready for your instruction." Emma's lips parted in disbelief. Brian's face blanched. Lily looked between them, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and vindication. Ariana took a slow step forward, not threatening, but undeniable. "Emma," she said softly, "you were asked to run my name. Instead, you chose to treat me as suspicious because you assumed you would never need to answer for it." Emma swallowed hard. "I did not assume anything," she stammered, but even she did not believe her own words. The passengers did not believe them either. A man in row 3 lifted his voice. "We all saw what happened. She asked for a simple check and you refused. That is on you." A woman near the window added, "You escalated it." "Not her," The truth gathered around them like a verdict. Emma's throat tightened. "Who are you?" she asked again, her voice cracking down the middle. Ariana exhaled, the kind of slow breath taken by someone who had carried this weight before. "You will know soon enough," she replied. "But for now, understand this. The system you thought would protect you is the same system that answers to me." The overhead chimes sounded again, more urgent this time. "Lead attendant," the captain said. "I am being instructed to pause departure until identity verification is completed. If you are unable to resolve this, I will come to first class myself." Emma's shoulders collapsed inward at the words. Brian whispered, "He has never come out of the cockpit before departure." The cabin felt smaller now, compressed by consequence. Lily stepped closer to Ariana, not touching her, but aligning with her in quiet solidarity. "I am sorry," she murmured. "This should never have happened." Ariana nodded once, the gesture brief but meaningful. She then turned her attention back to Emma, who stood trembling in the aisle. The moment held, heavy and inevitable. Ariana spoke with a clarity that carried to every seat. "Nia," she said, "activate Phase 3. And somewhere inside the airline system, far beyond the walls of the aircraft, a very different kind of storm began to form. Phase 3 began quietly, without alarms or flashing lights, but the effect was immediate. Ariana's phone lit up with a new string of confirmations, each one carrying the weight of authority that reached far beyond the walls of the aircraft. The cabin fell into an even deeper silence as passengers sensed the shift, the way people instinctively sense a sudden change in pressure before a storm breaks. Emma's breath hitched when she heard the soft chime from her own crew tablet. She lifted it with shaking hands, and her eyes widened as the screen displayed a message that was never meant for routine staff. "Executive-level identity verification in progress. Compliance observers alerted." She almost dropped the device. "Brian," she whispered, "I think we made a mistake." Brian stared at his own screen as a new alert appeared, red and unmistakable. "Crew misconduct flagged for review. Stand by for corporate contact." His mouth fell open. "I did not even touch her. I did not do anything." A man in row 2 muttered loudly enough for half the cabin to hear. "You did plenty." Ariana remained standing, her shoulders squared, her presence steady as the aircraft itself. She had not raised her voice once, yet every person in the room was listening as if she commanded the intercom. "Nia," she said, "report Phase 3 status." Nia's voice was calm and precise, as if reading directly from a corporate decision that had already been sealed. "Ariana, Phase 3 is active. Internal Affairs has joined the audit. The captain has been briefed. Compliance is monitoring this cabin in real time." Emma's face drained of color. Brian ran a hand over his head in disbelief. Lily stepped backward, bracing her hand on the galley wall, her eyes darting between Ariana and the crew she had once looked up to. "This cannot be happening," Emma murmured, her voice barely audible. But it was, and everyone knew it. The passengers now watched openly, no longer pretending not to witness the unraveling of something much larger than a seating dispute. A middle-aged woman near row 4 lifted her voice. "She asked you to verify her name. You refused. That is all this is." A man beside her added, "You could have avoided all of this if you treated her like a human being." The truth echoed down the aisle, a clean slice through the tension. Emma clutched her tablet to her chest. "You do not understand," she stammered. "People come in here pretending to have premium access every week. We have to enforce the rules." Ariana looked at her steadily, unflinching. "Rules are not the problem," she said. "The way you applied them is." Her words were quiet but unmistakable, a line drawn with perfect precision. Brian shook his head. "You are not being fair. You do not look like someone who—" He stopped himself too late, but the cabin heard it anyway. Ariana inhaled, slowly, the way someone inhales before choosing not to break. For a moment, she did not speak. She let the weight of what he almost said sink into the walls, into the carpeted floor, into the nervous shifting of the crew. Then she answered with a calm that made the temperature drop. "I do not look like someone who belongs in seat 1A. Is that what you were about to say?" Brian's silence was his confession. Lily lowered her gaze, ashamed on their behalf. Ariana continued, her tone even. "This is not the first time I have been judged by what you think I should look like. But it will be the last time you use that assumption without consequence." The overhead speakers chimed again, this time with the captain sounding noticeably tense. First class, this is Captain Reynolds. I have just been informed that corporate has escalated the situation. I am coming out. A ripple of shock passed through the cabin. Captains did not leave the cockpit before departure unless the situation was grave. Emma stumbled backward into the galley as if trying to make herself smaller. Brian stood rigid, like a statue carved out of fear. And Lily looked at Ariana with quiet recognition, as if she were seeing something she should have seen all along. Ariana remained still, her phone glowing softly in her hand. Then, with the kind of controlled certainty that carried more force than any raised voice, she spoke. Nia, notify them. When the captain steps into this cabin, I will give him my full identity. A hush fell so complete it felt physical. The aircraft was no longer preparing for takeoff. It was preparing for truth. The door of the cockpit opened with a slow mechanical click, and every head in the first-class cabin turned as Captain Reynolds stepped into the aisle. His presence alone shifted the air. He carried the kind of authority that usually settled arguments before they even began. But today, the argument had outgrown him. His expression tightened as he scanned the scene, taking in Ariana standing calmly in front of seat 1A. Emma pressed against the galley wall with her tablet clutched like a shield, Brian rigid with panic, and Lily standing with her hands folded in front of her, quiet but resolute. I need someone to explain why corporate oversight is contacting me 20 minutes before departure, he said, his voice steady but unmistakably stern. Emma opened her mouth, then closed it again. She tried once more, but her voice came out thin. Captain, we had a passenger who refused to comply with seating protocol. Captain Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Is that all? She also initiated an audit from the cabin, Brian added quickly, hoping to divert blame. That is why corporate is involved. At that, the captain turned to Ariana. He looked her over, not with judgment, but with calculation, the way someone reads instruments before trusting them. Ma'am, he said, what exactly have you activated? Ariana did not rush. She lifted her phone and held it at waist level, the screen still glowing with audit indicators. A compliance review, she replied calmly. Triggered after multiple requests for a standard name verification were ignored. A murmur moved through the cabin. Captain Reynolds shifted his gaze to Emma. Is that accurate? Emma hesitated. She looked at Ariana, then at the captain, then at the passengers watching every breath she took. She did not look. She froze as soon as she heard herself say it. But the words were already out. The cabin went still. Captain Reynolds' face hardened. Finish that sentence, he said, although he clearly did not need her to. Emma shook her head quickly. I meant, she did not present proper documentation. Lily finally stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension with quiet bravery. Captain, that is not true. She asked them to run her name. They refused. I saw her name in the crew registry. I recognized it. Captain Reynolds turned sharply. Crew registry? His attention returned to Ariana, and for the first time, something like recognition flickered across his face. Your name is Ariana Cole. The cabin held its breath. Ariana met his eyes. Yes, and you know what that means. The captain exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carries the weight of understanding. He stepped back, grounding himself. I do, he said. Emma's knees nearly gave out. Brian whispered, she cannot be, but his voice trailed off as his tablet chimed with a new, unmistakable notification. Identity confirmed. Senior Pilot Evaluation Authority. Executive Ownership Division. He read the words out loud before he could stop himself. A wave of shock broke across the cabin. Passengers gasped. Someone let out a whispered, "Oh my God." Ariana lifted her chin slightly. You called security on a pilot, she said softly. On someone who has logged more hours in the sky than you have spent in uniform. She paused, letting the truth land before she finished. And you dismissed me in an airline I partially own. Emma's tablet slipped from her hands and hit the carpet with a dull thud. She stared at Ariana as if seeing her for the first time, her face draining of every trace of defiance. Captain Reynolds straightened. Miss Cole, I apologize deeply for what you experienced today. This is unacceptable at every level. Ariana nodded once, accepting the apology but not letting it erase what led to it. Captain, she said, I am activating corporate oversight in full. Compliance will take it from here. Understood, he replied. Emma took a stumbling step forward. Please, Miss Cole, I did not know. Ariana stopped her with a look. It was not anger. It was truth, delivered quietly and without room for escape. You did not need to know who I was, she said. You only needed to know how to treat a person. The cabin absorbed the words like a verdict. Captain Reynolds bowed his head slightly. Miss Cole, what would you like to do next? Ariana turned toward the aisle, her voice steady, her presence unwavering. We proceed, she said. But first, compliance will address the behavior that brought us here. And just like that, every passenger realized they were witnessing something far greater than a misunderstanding. They were witnessing a reckoning. Captain Reynolds remained in the aisle, but the center of gravity in the cabin had already shifted to Ariana. Every passenger, every crew member, even the humming engines beneath the floor seemed to orbit around her composure. Corporate oversight alerts continued to pulse across the screens of the crew tablets, each notification tightening the noose around the choices Emma and Brian had made. Ariana did not rush. She stood in the narrow aisle with the calm steadiness of someone who had weathered storms at 30,000 feet and walked away stronger every time. Nia, she said, her voice carrying effortlessly through the space. Initiate the compliance call. A moment later, the overhead speaker chimed softly, and a voice came through, clear and authoritative. This is Carla Bennett, Chief Compliance Officer. Captain Reynolds, Miss Cole, I am now monitoring the cabin feed. Proceed when ready. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She knew the name. Everyone in the airline knew the name. Carla Bennett was not someone who appeared in ordinary audits. She was summoned when systems failed and accountability had to be rewritten. Captain Reynolds straightened his shoulders. Carla, you should know that Ms. Cole experienced discriminatory treatment by members of the cabin crew before departure. There was a pause, not of confusion, but of calculation. Understood, Carla replied. Ms. Cole, please confirm. Ariana did not step forward. She did not need to. I confirmed that I requested routine verification of my name, she said. I was denied. I was dismissed. And I was labeled an unverified passenger without cause. The words landed with the precision of a gavel. Carla continued. Captain, freeze the crew's system access except for trainee personnel. Effective immediately. Emma spun toward Brian. What does that mean? She whispered. But the answer came before he could guess. Both of their tablets went dark at once, screens fading to corporate lockout mode. A metallic sound escaped Emma's throat, a mixture of shock and dread. Brian's hands shook as he pressed the power button repeatedly, but the device remained unresponsive. Captain Reynolds maintained a neutral expression, but even he could not hide the gravity of what had just occurred. Passengers murmured, watching the slow collapse of authority unfold in real time. Ariana kept her eyes on Emma, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. You said earlier that people pretend to belong in places like this, she said softly. Tell me, Emma, what exactly did you see in me that made you decide I did not? Emma backed further into the galley wall, unable to speak. Her throat tightened as if the words she wanted to use no longer fit inside her mouth. Ariana continued. Because it was not protocol. It was not procedure. It was not any rule printed in your handbook. Her voice lowered, steady but sharp. It was bias. Plain and simple. A man in row 3 nodded solemnly. A woman whispered, finally someone is saying it. And another added, she is right. Carla's voice returned. Captain Reynolds, Ms. Cole now holds full authority for interim disciplinary action under the Executive Ownership Charter. Emma's knees nearly buckled. The passengers stiffened, realizing the magnitude of what was about to happen. Ariana did not smirk. She did not revel in the moment. Instead, she took a breath, recalling every time she had been turned away, doubted, spoken down to, or treated as a lesser presence in a space she had earned. This moment was not revenge. It was correction. Emma Hart, Ariana said, speaking the name with quiet precision. Your conduct today violated guest dignity, procedural fairness, and corporate anti-discrimination policy. Effective immediately, you are removed from active duty pending investigation. Emma's hand covered her mouth as if trying to keep from falling apart. Brian took a small step forward. Ms. Cole, please, he pleaded. I did not mean any harm. I just followed her lead. Ariana turned her gaze toward him. And that is the problem, she said. Leadership does not excuse bias. and silence does not absolve participation. Carla's voice echoed over the speakers again. Brian Lewis, you are also removed from active duty. Your conduct during the incident will be reviewed by Internal Affairs. Lily, standing to the side, swallowed hard. Her eyes filled with a mixture of apprehension and relief. Ms. Cole, she said softly, I am sorry I did not speak sooner. Ariana's expression softened. You spoke when it mattered, she replied. That is what courage looks like. Captain Reynolds bowed his head slightly. Ms. Cole, do you wish to proceed with staff replacement and pre-flight clearance? Ariana nodded once, her voice steady. Yes. We will not move this aircraft until the cabin reflects the standard we promise every passenger. And with that, the balance of power in the cabin shifted completely. Not through shouting, not through force, through truth spoken with unwavering calm, and through the steady revelation of who Ariana Cole truly was. The cabin felt suspended between two worlds. The world it had been 10 minutes ago, where Emma and Brian controlled the aisle with unchecked authority, and the world it was becoming now, reshaped under the quiet command of Ariana Cole. Passengers watched as Emma and Brian stood frozen in the narrow galley, their badges still pinned to their uniforms, but their authority already gone, stripped away not by force but by truth. A soft chime echoed from the overhead speakers as Carla Bennett's voice returned, cool and deliberate. Captain Reynolds, temporary replacement crew have been notified. Ground operations will dispatch 2 standby attendants to your aircraft within minutes. Please maintain cabin readiness until they arrive. Captain Reynolds acknowledged her with a firm nod, then turned toward Ariana with the respect of someone addressing a superior. Ms. Cole, would you like them escorted off the aircraft now, or after the replacements arrive? The question caused another murmur to ripple through the passengers. Some leaned forward, others folded their arms, all of them holding on to the moment as if they had become witnesses to a historic shift. Ariana took a slow breath, her gaze never wavering from Emma and Brian. They will remain aboard until replacements arrive, she said. Every passenger deserves to see the consequences of misconduct handled transparently. We do not hide accountability behind closed doors. It was not spite. It was standard. It was the kind of leadership that insisted on sunlight. Emma covered her face with her hands, her shoulders trembling. Brian stared at the carpet, unable to lift his eyes. Lily stepped carefully beside Ariana, offering a tentative but sincere whisper. Thank you for not letting this be pushed aside, she said. Ariana gave her a quiet nod. Accountability is not cruelty. It is necessary. 2 passengers across the aisle nodded in agreement. One whispered, "This is how change happens," and another added, "This is leadership." The aircraft door cracked open as ground staff signaled entry. 2 replacement attendants, both wearing polished uniforms and steady expressions, stepped inside. They scanned the scene quickly, understanding instantly that they had walked into a reckoning. Captain Reynolds approached them. You are taking over for the remainder of the flight. Please proceed with first-class briefing and standby while we finalize compliance instructions. The replacements nodded and moved to their positions, their eyes flicking briefly toward Ariana with silent recognition. Corporate had clearly informed them who she was. Carla's voice sounded again. Ms. Cole, formal removal procedures are ready. Please provide the final directive. Every head turned toward her. Even the engines seemed to quiet themselves. Ariana stepped fully into the aisle, her presence grounding the space. She looked directly at Emma and Brian, who stood side by side now, stripped of pretense, exposed under the weight of their own actions. Emma Hart, she said, her voice steady but carrying the force of a courtroom verdict. You are formally removed from service for discriminatory conduct, abuse of procedural authority, and failure to perform required verification checks. You will surrender your badge and credentials to the captain immediately. Emma's hands shook violently as she unpinned her badge, her breath ragged as she placed it into Captain Reynolds' waiting hand. Ariana turned to Brian. Brian Lewis, you are formally removed from service for complicity in discriminatory treatment, misuse of procedural authority, and failure to uphold guest dignity. You will also surrender your badge. Brian's face crumpled as he handed it over. Several passengers exhaled in relief. Others shook their heads in disbelief at everything they had just witnessed. Captain Reynolds stepped forward, voice firm. Emma Hart and Brian Lewis, You are to exit the aircraft under escort and report directly to ground compliance. You are not permitted to address passengers or staff during removal. The replacements moved calmly into position beside them. Emma attempted one last plea. Miss Cole, please, I did not know who you were. If I had known. Ariana lifted a hand gently, silencing her without harshness, but without forgiveness. That is exactly the problem, she said softly. Respect should not depend on recognition. It should not depend on status. It should not depend on the color of a person's skin. Her words fell over the cabin like a final, undeniable truth. The passengers erupted in applause, not loud or chaotic, but deliberate and unified, a sound that acknowledged the justice unfolding in front of them. Emma and Brian were escorted down the aisle, past every seat, past every witness to their choices. And as the aircraft door closed behind them, the cabin felt lighter, clearer, as though something toxic had finally been released. Captain Reynolds turned back to Ariana, a question in his eyes. But Ariana spoke first. Her voice carried purpose. Let us continue. We will fly with dignity today. And for the first time since the confrontation began, the aircraft seemed ready to move forward. The applause faded gradually, not because the passengers stopped feeling it, but because a different kind of quiet settled over the cabin, the kind that follows resolution, the kind that makes people sit back and breathe again. The two replacement attendants took their positions at the front of the cabin, resetting service carts and straightening the aisle with practiced efficiency, but their eyes kept drifting toward Ariana with an unmistakable mixture of respect and awe. Captain Reynolds returned to the cockpit for a moment, coordinating with ground control and compliance, then stepped out once more, smoothing his uniform as he faced the first-class cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, we will resume pre-flight procedures. Thank you for your patience. But everyone knew the patience had not been for the airline. It had been for Ariana. As the captain stepped away, one of the passengers in row 3 leaned forward. Miss Cole, he said, his voice sincere, thank you for standing up for yourself. And for us. A woman across the aisle nodded. I have flown this airline for years. I have never seen anyone hold people accountable like that. Ariana acknowledged them with a quiet, gracious nod, but she did not linger in the praise. Her gaze swept the cabin, not to command attention, but to make sure the air was finally clear. She eased back into seat 1A, placing her phone gently on the armrest, the screen now showing a final confirmation message. Compliance case initiated. Internal affairs notified. Status, active. Lily approached cautiously, stopping just short of Ariana's seat. Miss Cole, she said softly, I cannot tell you how sorry I am for everything that happened. I should have spoken up sooner. Ariana turned toward her, her expression softening. Courage does not always arrive at the beginning, she said. What matters is that you found it. Lily exhaled shakily, visibly relieved. I will do better, she promised. I know you will, Ariana replied. The new attendants conducted their pre-flight checks, glancing occasionally toward Ariana, as if silently thanking her for raising a standard they too had long hoped to see enforced. Carla Bennett's voice chimed briefly through Ariana's phone. Ariana, internal affairs has taken full jurisdiction. You may proceed with the flight. We will update you after landing. Ariana responded simply. Thank you, Carla. Ensure the report is thorough. Always, Carla replied before disconnecting. As the aircraft door sealed and the engines began to spool, a sense of restored order filled the space. Not the fragile order enforced by authority misused, but the firm, steady order created when dignity is restored. The passengers settled into their seats as the safety demonstration began. Some whispered to one another, recounting the events moment by moment, as if trying to make sense of the fact that they had witnessed a real-time transformation of power, justice, and professionalism. As the plane taxied, the hum beneath the floorboards felt different. It felt aligned. It felt right. Ariana rested her head gently against the back of the seat, her eyes focused on the cabin ahead of her. She did not look triumphant. She looked resolute, determined, peaceful in a way that comes not from winning, but from setting something straight. When the aircraft lifted smoothly off the runway, a man across the aisle leaned over and whispered to his wife, "Imagine thinking she did not belong here." His wife shook her head. She belongs more than anyone. At cruising altitude, The replacement attendant approached Ariana with a warm, steady professionalism. "Miss Cole, may I offer you something to drink?" Ariana smiled gently. "Water will be fine. Thank you." The attendant nodded and stepped away, leaving behind a sense of gratitude that felt deeper than simple service. As Ariana looked out the window into the endless stretch of sky, she reflected on the years of being underestimated, doubted, spoken down to, and pushed aside in spaces she had fought to enter. But today was different. Today, she had not only reclaimed her place, she had claimed responsibility for every person who might come after her. She whispered softly to herself, not for the cabin, not for the recording systems, but for the younger version of her who once wondered if the world would ever change. "I did not raise my voice," she said, her breath steady against the glass. "I raised the standard." And somewhere high above the clouds, the sky seemed to agree.